Parshas Miketz. This week's Parsha begins with the introduction of Yosef as ruler. He had been framed for a crime he did not commit. He was sentenced to prison. He served his time. He successfully interpreted dreams. A couple of years later, the Sar Hamashkim, Paro's butler, responds to a call by Paro. Paro has troubling dreams. The Sar Hamashkim says, "Oh, let's get this Nar Ivri, this Hebrew lad. He did a good job interpreting my dream. Maybe he can do yours." And he does. And as a result, he predicts years of plenty, years of famine, and Paro appoints him as the ruler of all of Israel, second only to Paro. People come for food. Among the people come for food are Yosef's brothers. Now, Yosef does not let on to his brothers that he is their brother. He recognizes them, but Heim lo hikiruhu, they did not recognize him. So there's a bit of a ruse taking place in this week's parsha, and Yosef manipulates them, and he says, "I think you're spies." And they say, "No, we're not spies." And they proceed to tell him that there are originally 12 brothers. One is no longer there, and the youngest is with their father. And he says, "Well, okay, then all of you stay here except for one, and you go and bring your brother back." And he puts them in prison for 3 days. And then when he comes out, he has this change of heart. And he says, "No, let's do it this way. One of you stays here. The rest of you go back, bring them the food to your family, etc. And then bring back your youngest brother." They're still freaked out. The brothers are very, very distressed. And they say, Vayomru, this is Membez Chav Aleph. That's 42:21, verse 21. Vayomru ish el achiv. And they each one said to his brother, "Avol ashemim anachnu." We're guilty. We are really guilty. On what? Al achinu, on our brother. Asher ra'inu tzaras nafsho b'schanano eleinu v'lo shamanu. We saw him suffering when he pleaded before us, and we didn't respond. We didn't listen. Al kain ba'a eleinu atzarazos. And that's why this trouble comes. Now, this is referring to when the brothers put Yosef in a pit. And presumably the Torah doesn't record it. And before some actually point out that the Torah doesn't record it. But Yosef presumably pleaded. He cried out. His chanein. He engaged in supplication before his brothers. But they ignored him. Now what's interesting is, why is it that they're talking about ignoring his pleas rather than, if they're feeling guilty, why aren't they feeling guilty about having sentenced him to this punishment in the first place? Why is it that they're saying that the reason they feel guilty is because he called out and they didn't respond appropriately? So the commentaries have different approaches. One of the approaches is that actually Yosef had spread bad news about his brothers, and he was deserving of punishment. So the brothers did not feel guilty over having sentenced him to the pit, to this punishment, or even to death. What they did feel guilty about was ignoring his pleas. He was a brother. He was a lad. He was a child. He was 17 years old. And they ignored him. Now, they've obviously been carrying it around with them for a while. But if we listen to the next verse, we see that there's grounds for a different take on what was developing here. Vaya'an Reuven. This is in the very next verse. This is in 22. Vaya'an Reuven osam lemor. And Reuven responds to them saying, "Halo amarti alechem lemor. Didn't I tell you, al techatu bayeled? V'lo shematem. Don't sin against the child, and you did not listen. V'gam damo hinei nidrash." And now his blood is being sought. In other words, there's a settling of scores over his blood. What Reuven is saying is, it's not just that we were cruel, that we didn't listen to him when he cried out, but the very fact that we singled him out and punished him, that was wrong. What's clear here is, either way you look at it, the brothers are carrying around this guilt, because otherwise something bad that's happening to them wouldn't have triggered it. And the Radak and Rabbeinu B'Chaye and others contrast this with Rishonim. It's mentioned psukim in verses in Zechariah that people who engage in immoral behavior and actually even kill people and don't feel any remorse or regret, unfortunately, we've witnessed that in our day. These are the truly evil people. Nobody ever goes through life without sinning. Chazal say that there were 4 who never sinned. But even righteous people sin. Adam. Ein tzadik ba'aretz asher ya'aseh tov v'lo yachta. There is no righteous person on this world who does good exclusively and doesn't sin. The question is, how do you deal with that sin? Do you cover it up and you say, whether to other people or worse, perhaps to yourself, and say that it wasn't a sin? Or do you admit it to yourself, to whoever it's appropriate to do so? It's not always appropriate to admit one's sins. And do you acknowledge it, confront it, and deal with it. The halacha is that if somebody commits a sin, the requirement for doing tshuva is regret, is stopping to do it, resolving not to do it in the future, and confession. What we see here is an acknowledgement, regret, and confession. What we will see in the next parsha is not only regret over how they treated Yosef, whether it's because they were callous to his pleas or that they engaged in venal and corrupt justice. In the next week's parsha with Yehuda, he says, how can I see my father suffer? Okay, now we get the total picture, that there are others who suffer as a result of a person's, who may suffer as a result of a person's indiscretion or doing something inappropriate. And part of dealing with that history is reconciling with all of the victims of the crime. But the difference between a rasha and a tzaddik is not that one sins and the other doesn't. It's that one sins and does nothing about it and even denies that he did anything wrong. And the other one, when tsaris come, the Gemara says that Yisurin boin adam, if suffering comes on an individual, what should his response be? So it says, Yifashvesh b'masav yaseh tshuva. He should examine his ways and repent. He should correct the things that he did wrong. It doesn't say that you're going to get it automatically, although there is one well-regarded Rav in whose name I heard, I tried to verify it, I haven't been able to do so yet, so I'm saying it anonymously for right now, who said that when something happens and you get this immediate thought that, oh, it's because I spoke disrespectfully, or because I cut a corner here, or whatever it was, that has an element of divine inspiration, and you should hold on to that, and you should work on that. Now, sometimes it's wrong. A healthy person will frequently get right what he has to work on. Somebody who's not healthy or who is going through an unusual amount of stress sometimes will attribute his suffering to other things, to the wrong things. He will assume that he knows. The biggest problem, in my eyes, is when we attribute the suffering of others to their shortcoming. My Rabbi, Rav Ahron Soloveichik, told me that the Gemara says when troubles come upon a person, he should examine his ways and do tshuva. The Gemara does not say when troubles come upon another person, you should examine his ways and tell him what he has to do tshuva about. That, Rav Ahron said, is chutzpah. That's nerve. That's azus panim. We do not have, we have license, as a matter of fact, not only license, but we are urged to constantly examine our ways and to use whatever discomfort or suffering or tsaris or pain that comes to us to motivate us to examine our ways. But when somebody else suffers, we do not have permission to examine their ways and to tell them why or how they have to improve themselves. We're responsible for our own ruchnius, and we'd be doing a great service to mankind if we take care of our own ruchnius, our own spirituality, and be the best people we can be. Have a good Shabbos.